On March 21st, 1987, the legendary Dean Martin was performing in front of 5,000 spectators at Balls Casino in Las Vegas. He was singing one of his most iconic numbers, "Everybody Loves Somebody," when suddenly he froze mid-performance, looking toward the stage wings, his face drained of all color. Without any explanation, he dropped his microphone and departed the stage in silence. The audience assumed this was part of the entertainment, but backstage, Dean Martin's entire world was crumbling. His beloved son, Dean Paul, had just died. The following 2 days would expose a side of Dean Martin that remained unknown to the public. A father completely shattered, a man from whom recovery would prove impossible. To grasp the magnitude of this tragedy, one must first understand who Dean Paul Martin truly was. He represented far more than just the offspring of a Hollywood titan. He was Dean's greatest source of pride, the continuation of his legacy, his fundamental reason for existence. Dean Paul, nicknamed Dino by his father, entered the world on November 17, 1951, and grew up under the intense spotlight of one of Hollywood's most celebrated performers. Yet, unlike numerous children of famous actors who struggle under such pressure, Dean Paul flourished. His accomplishments were remarkable. He excelled as a competitive tennis player during his youth, performed as a musician in the pop-rock ensemble Dino, Desi, and Billy alongside Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch, appeared in both film and television productions, and served with distinction as a captain in the California Air National Guard, piloting advanced F-4 Phantom fighter jets. Dean Paul represented everything his father had dreamed he would become: gifted, modest, courageous, and genuinely adored by those around him. Throughout his public career, Dean Martin maintained an image of emotional restraint. He crafted a persona of unflappable sophistication, the type of person who never allowed circumstances to affect his demeanor. However, when it came to his son, this carefully constructed facade simply dissolved. Close associates and family members acknowledged without question that Dean Paul held an exceptional place in Dean's heart. While this doesn't diminish the importance of his other children, the preference was unmistakable and profound. Their connection transcended the typical father-son relationship. They were genuine best friends who shared a deep, unbreakable bond. By early 1987, Dean Martin had reached 69 years of age. His active performing career was drawing to a close, though he still accepted occasional engagements, primarily in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. These performances bore little resemblance to his legendary shows of earlier decades. Dean's physical condition was deteriorating noticeably. A lifetime of smoking had severely compromised his respiratory health. His signature silky voice had become rough and strained. Nevertheless, he retained the charisma and magnetism that had captivated audiences throughout his illustrious career. On the evening of March 21st, Dean was scheduled to entertain at Balls Casino in Las Vegas. The showroom was completely full with 5,000 paying customers eager to witness the Cool King perform. Dean arrived at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, earlier than was typical for him. His road manager, Eddie Marsh, detected something unusual about Dean's demeanor that particular night. Dean appeared lighter in mood. Eddie would later describe what he observed. Typically before performances, Dean maintained a quiet, reserved manner, moving through preparations mechanically. But that evening, he was surprisingly playful. He exchanged jokes with the crew and inquired about their personal lives. It was as though the Dean of his younger years had returned. What Eddie failed to realize was that Dean had spoken with his son earlier that morning. From his station at March Air Force Base in California, Dean Paul had telephoned his father. Though the conversation lasted only a few moments, it carried genuine warmth. Dean Paul expressed his affection for his father. Dean conveyed his pride in his son's accomplishments. This exchange was unremarkable, repeated countless times throughout their relationship. Tragically, neither man understood this would be their final conversation. When Dean Martin stepped onto the stage at 9 o'clock in the evening, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. He was impeccably dressed in formal black attire, the very image of a legendary performer. The orchestra commenced, and Dean launched into his opening selection. The crowd responded with tremendous energy, cheering and whistling, completely mesmerized by the entertainment before them. Dean proceeded methodically through his prepared repertoire. He performed That's Amore, Ain't that a kick in the head? And memories are made of this. The spectators sang along enthusiastically. And for those 90 minutes, the glory days of Las Vegas entertainment appear to have returned triumphantly. At approximately 9:35 in the evening, Dean began performing Everybody Loves Somebody, one of his signature compositions, the same song that had displaced the Beatles from the top of the charts in 1964. The audience swayed in unison. Romantic couples embraced tenderly. Dean's raspy yet commanding voice reverberated throughout the venue. Then the situation changed dramatically. Eddie Marsh appeared in the wings on stage left, holding a telephone. His expression was ashen and disturbed. He attempted to capture Dean's attention without interrupting the performance. He gestured repeatedly, with increasing urgency. Dean perceived the signals during the verse and ceased singing. The band, confused by this departure from the program, continued playing for several additional measures before gradually stopping. The audience, interpreting this as a planned theatrical element, settled into anticipation. Dean stared directly at Eddie, and in that precise moment, everyone who subsequently heard the account would acknowledge perceiving a fundamental transformation in Dean's expression. "Something's wrong," Dean announced into the microphone. His tone was emotionless and hollow, devoid of panic. "Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen." He positioned the microphone carefully on the piano and walked off stage. The audience responded with applause, believing he was taking a brief intermission. The orchestra began playing background music, but a disaster was unfolding out of public view. Eddie Marsh stood waiting in the wings, tears flowing down his cheeks. When Dean reached him, Eddie found himself unable to speak. He simply placed the telephone into Dean's hands. On the other end of the line was a colonel from the California Air National Guard. "Mr. Martin, I'm calling to inform you about your son, Captain Dean Paul Martin." Dean's entire body started trembling. "What's happened?" he asked. The colonel's voice was measured and grave. "Sir, I regret to inform you that your son's aircraft crashed during a training exercise earlier this afternoon at approximately 4 o'clock. The plane descended in the San Bernardino Mountains. Regrettably, there were no survivors." Dean released the telephone, but he didn't vocalize his pain. He wasn't weeping. He simply remained stationary, his mind unable to process the information, staring blankly at nothing in particular. Eddie attempted to provide physical support, but Dean pulled away from his touch. He moved slowly and numbly in the direction of his dressing quarters. The stage administrator appeared suddenly. "Dean, what's occurring? Should we terminate the show?" Dean rotated to face him, and in a voice that sounded disconnected from reality, he stated, "My son is dead." These 4 words suspended themselves in the atmosphere like a pronouncement of doom. The stage administrator immediately proceeded onto the stage to communicate that the performance was being discontinued due to an unforeseen emergency. The management would provide refunds to all attendees. The bewildered spectators gradually exited the showroom, most unaware of what had transpired, remaining ignorant until media reports broke the story the following morning. Dean Martin remained in his dressing room, still clothed in his tuxedo. Eddie Marsh stood near the entrance, uncertain of his role or what assistance to provide. Dean displayed no tears. He spoke not a word. He simply kept his gaze fixed upon his own hands. Following what seemed like an endless passage of time, Dean finally articulated words. "He called me this morning. He told me he loved me." Eddie nodded, his face streaming with tears. "He truly did love you deeply, Dean. That was unmistakable." Dean's voice became distant and detached. He was flying. He absolutely cherished flying. He told me it made him feel liberated and whole. Dean suddenly rose to his feet with determination. "I must return home. I need to inform Jean." Jean Martin was Dean's former spouse and the biological mother of Dean Paul. Though their marriage had dissolved in 1973, they maintained a close relationship, bound together by their shared devotion to their children. Eddie promptly arranged transportation to Jean's residence in Beverly Hills. The automobile journey was completely quiet. Dean occupied the rear passenger seat, gazing silently out the window at the receding lights of Las Vegas. Eddie sat alongside him, unable to formulate anything appropriate to communicate. What words could possibly comfort a father who had just lost a son? Upon reaching Jean's residence, she was already positioned in the doorway. Someone had already contacted her with the devastating news. Her face was severely swollen and reddened from extensive crying. Dean emerged from the vehicle and made his way toward her slowly. As he approached, he collapsed completely into her embrace. In that moment, Dean Martin finally surrendered to his sorrow. His tears came in profound, uncontrollable waves. The anguish that emerged seemed to originate from a place of such overwhelming pain that all who witnessed it would carry that memory for the remainder of their existence. Jean maintained her hold on him, and together they wept bitterly for their lost son. The following morning, March 22, 1987, newspapers and media outlets everywhere carried the story. Dean Paul Martin, son of the legendary Dean Martin, had perished in an aircraft collision. The media throng descended upon the Martin family with voracious intensity. Reporters maintained vigils outside their residences. Photographic flashes illuminated the streets. Microphones were thrust into their faces repeatedly. The global public demanded to understand how Dean Martin was managing this crisis. But Dean wasn't managing anything. He was being consumed by the tragedy. The circumstances surrounding the crash were heartbreaking and devastating. Dean Paul had been operating an F-4 Phantom II aircraft during a standard training operation across the San Bernardino Mountains. The meteorological conditions were treacherous, dense cloud cover, and severely limited visibility. Approximately at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, his aircraft vanished from radar tracking systems. Rescue operations personnel were mobilized immediately, but the difficult mountainous landscape complicated locating the wreckage considerably. Discovery of the crash location required 3 full days. When searchers finally found it, their worst fears were validated. Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems officer, Captain Rayon Ortiz, had not survived the impact. The aircraft had collided with mountainous terrain at tremendous velocity. The destruction was total and complete. Dean Martin participated in a memorial ceremony on March 26, 1987, at the Los Angeles National Cemetery. It was a military funeral conducted with complete military honors. The attendance was enormous. Family relations companions, fellow military pilots, entertainment celebrities, and devoted admirers. Dean remained in the front position, wearing dark glasses intended to conceal his continuous crying. When Honor Guard presented him with a carefully folded American flag, Dean pressed it against his physical being and wept openly without restraint. This was decidedly not the emotionally controlled, perpetually composed Dean Martin recognized by the world. This was a grieving parent laying his child to permanent rest, and witnessing it was almost unbearable. Frank Sinatra, Dean's most intimate companion and fellow Rat Pack colleague, presented a tribute address. His voice wavered as he reminisced about Dean Paul, celebrating his bravery, his gifts, his compassionate character. Frank then directed his attention specifically to Dean and declared, "Dino, I recognize that no utterances can diminish your suffering, yet please understand that we all harbor deep affection for your boy, and we possess equal affection for you." Dean remained unresponsive. He sat clutching the folded flag tightly, his vision fixed on his son's casket position before him. Following the burial ceremony, Dean Martin withdrew entirely from community and public participation. He terminated all future performance commitments. He became unreachable to telephone communication. He scarcely ventured from his residence. Acquaintances who visited his home reported observing a man completely transformed into a hollow replica of his former self. He would recline in his living quarters, consuming alcohol, studying photographs of Dean Paul, and replaying recordings and videos of his son repeatedly. Shirley MacLaine, among Dean's most cherished companions, came to visit him approximately 4 weeks after the funeral service. She reported, upon entering his residence, it felt identical to stepping into a crypt or tomb. The window coverings were completely sealed, electric illumination was absent, and Dean remained seated in complete darkness, watching a recording of his younger son competing in a tennis match. Upon observing her, he communicated, "Surely, I cannot maintain this existence. I cannot continue living in a reality where my child has ceased to exist." Dean's daughter, Deanna Martin, made persistent efforts to extract her father from the grip of his bereavement. She made daily visits to his residence, delivered meals, and consistently attempted to convince him to go outside into daylight. But Dean remained unreachable and withdrawn. His emotional condition seemed to suggest that he had perished alongside Dino. Deanna expressed her observations candidly. My father's physical form remained present among the living, but his inner spirit had completely departed. As months and years advanced, Dean Martin's physical health experienced rapid deterioration. He developed a chronic lung condition as a consequence of his decades-long cigarette addiction. His body mass diminished significantly, and he ceased to maintain his previous standards of personal grooming and appearance. The man who had previously epitomized casual sophistication and cool elegance now presented as physically fragile and emotionally devastated. During 1988, Dean made a limited effort to resume his entertainment profession. He accepted an invitation to participate in a reunion performance series with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., marketed as the ultimate entertainment event. But after completing just several performances, Dean departed from the tour. He communicated to Frank, I lack the ability to continue this endeavor. Each instance I occupy the stage, my thoughts return to Dino. I consider how he should be present alongside me. I cannot maintain the pretense of happiness and entertainment anymore. Frank demonstrated complete comprehension. He made no attempt to persuade Dean to reconsider his decision. Instead, he embraced his companion warmly and expressed, You are deeply important to me, my friend. Dean Martin invested his remaining years in physical solitude and emotional withdrawal. He occupied his time viewing classic cinema, listening to recorded music, consuming alcohol, and contemplating his deceased son continuously. On December 25, 1995, the morning of Christmas, Dean Martin expired at his Beverly Hills residence. He had attained the age of 78 years. Medical professionals documented the primary cause as acute respiratory system dysfunction, but those who had genuinely known him comprehended a more fundamental reality. Dean Martin had essentially perished from profound emotional devastation. At Dean's funeral service, his daughter Deanna approached the speaking platform and delivered her farewell remarks. My father never truly recovered from the tragedy of losing Dino. He made a genuine effort. He absolutely did attempt to manage and persist. However, the emotional burden proved insurmountable. Throughout the subsequent 8 years, he transported that pain and sorrow with him every single day without exception. Currently, he has ultimately rejoined his son. I possess unwavering certainty that they are together in this moment, and my father has ultimately discovered complete peace. The account of Dean Martin and Dean Paul transcends mere entertainment industry gossip or celebrity circumstances. It represents a fundamental human tragedy that acknowledges a crucial reality. Grief does not restrict itself to particular demographics or social classes. It makes no distinction between legendary entertainment personalities and ordinary individuals. The devastation resulting from parental bereavement remains constant and uniform. Dean Martin's entire professional existence involved projecting an image of effortless, natural sophistication and composure. He demonstrated remarkable ability in making all aspects appear simple. Performance singing, theatrical work, engaging audiences. Yet beneath that surface presentation existed a human being capable of experiencing profound connection and equally profound suffering. When he experienced the loss of his son, the world encountered the authentic Dean Martin, not the celebrated performer, not the entertainment icon. Simply a grieving parent destroyed by the magnitude of his offspring's death. A recording exists from that evening, March 21st, 1987. While not broadly disseminated throughout popular culture, this documentation remains in existence. You can distinctly perceive Dean performing, "Everybody loves somebody." His vocal delivery demonstrates characteristic smoothness and assurance. Subsequently, you recognize him ceasing his performance. You become aware of the band's gradual stopping. You detect the perplexity evident in the audience's response. And upon careful listening, you can identify the precise instant when Dean Martin's existence underwent permanent transformation. That audio documentation produces an intensely unsettling emotional response, not due to its material content specifically, but rather because of what it fundamentally represents. It constitutes the auditory representation of a father's world terminating permanently. It is a sonic documentation of a human recognizing that nothing, not recognition, not material wealth, not demonstrated talent, possesses a capacity to insulate you from humanity's most terrible anguish. Dean Martin once communicated, "I would surrender everything I possess to recover my son. Every single thing. The wealth, the recognition, the career achievements. I would exchange it all for a single additional day spent with Dino." Yet, that opportunity never materialized. That experience does not come to any of us. And that constitutes the most devastating, most genuine truth of all.